everyone, I'm Mrs. Hoke, and I want to go over one of the programs that we use a lot in web design and development. So if you want to make a website, you can develop a website through code, or you could create it using something like a what you see is what you get software like a Wix or something like that. But everything needs to start with design. If you don't have anything to put on that website, nobody's going to look at it. So web design and development isn't just coding a website. That's something that we do absolutely, but it's also deciding how you want it laid out, the logo of the company, brand identity, objects that you're going to go ahead and put on there. So keep that in mind. I'm going to show you how to use some of the basic tools of Illustrator today, so you'll have the opportunity to create a couple of different fruits. To do that, you'll need to get into Adobe Illustrator. You're going to choose New File. Now up here, you'll notice there's lots of different options. The one thing I want you to completely understand is if you're creating something for the web, you need a screen size of 72 pixels per inch. And what that basically means is if you were to print something that's made for the web, it would be pixelated, which I'm sure you know what that looks like at this point. However, if you were going to put something on the internet, it only supports lower sizes. So 72 ppi is what we use for websites. If I were to use any bigger size, I would actually make a file size that may take longer to load because it would be so much bigger. For instance, if I'm making something to print, see how that's 300 ppi? That's a big difference. So what you want to make sure of is when you're making artwork, you pick out the proper resolution. So we're going to create something for print, and we're going to create a letter size. So if I wanted to print this, or you wanted to print this, you would go ahead and be able to put it right on letter size paper. Then we're going to create some artboards. Go ahead and either toggle that up to 6, or just change it here with the number. Completely up to you how you want to do it. You want to keep your orientation at portrait mode, which is tall, versus wide. So you want to keep it portrait, not landscape. We're going to go ahead, and I like to switch this over to inches so that if I add a ruler, I have a better understanding of how big something's going to print. I think more in inches than I would say in pixels, and I'm sure you do too. So Adobe Illustrator is going to load, and if you see anything on the artboard underneath, that's just someone's work from who used your computer before you. Recent stuff will always show there. All right, so here I have my artboards. I want to point out a couple of cool things. So if I wanted to zoom into something, I could hit Command and plus, hold down Command while pressing plus, and I could zoom in. The same is said for zooming out. And if I wanted to just see something more clearly, or I wanted something centered, I could hold down my space bar, which would turn my arrow into a hand, and I can move things around. So the very first thing you want to do is name your work. It's just like putting a piece of paper with your name on it, right? That's the first thing you do. So to do that, we're going to use the text tool. Now, the text tool does nothing but write things. So I'm going to write on here, Mrs. Hope, because that's my name. And then I'm going to grab that while holding down the Alt option. And do you see how it changes my mouse into a duplicated mouse? That tells you that something is copying. So now I can take those two items and I can do the same thing. And that green line indicates to me that I'm just in the right line. So if I were to hold these up in a stack, they would be in a similar position. Not exactly the same, because you can see this distance isn't exactly the same, but they'd at least be on the same plane horizontally. Now, those of you that are not familiar with how to use a Mac, next to your spacebar to the left is a command key. That's kind of like Control for Windows. It is your go-to best friend for keyboard shortcuts. Then to the left of that is the Alt or Option key. So make sure you're familiar with those to move forward. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make an apple. Now, what I like to do is I like to define what I'm doing. So I might go in and write apple, pear, orange, grape, so on and so forth. This one would be, say, my choice. I'll just do a lime. And then here, we'll do a collage. That's where you could bring all of your artwork together at the end. So, to go ahead and make my fruit, I need to use these different tools. So every time I change a tool, my mouse does something different. And that tells me or helps me to realize what tool I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and work with the ellipse tool. If I hold down on a shape or a tool, it'll give me oftentimes a list of what's available. I want an ellipse because that makes circles. Now, if you notice, some of them don't do that. So right here, this does nothing if I hold it down, but this one does. The main difference is that this right here is like a little arrow to indicate that there's more nested within that tool, more opportunities and options. So as you look through these, you can see that some have them and some do not. We're going to go ahead and go back to that ellipse tool, and I want to zoom in so I can really see what I'm doing. So I've hit Command plus, I've used my space bar while I moved around that screen. My hands were definitely in the wrong place on the keyboard when I wrote apple, and that's totally okay. I'm going to switch back to my text tool, and I'm going to fix that. Nobody's perfect. All right. Now that I fixed it, I'll go back to the ellipse tool. I'm going to click, hold down Shift, and drag. Now, the reason I'm holding down Shift is because if I don't do it that way, I get all kinds of weird shapes. But when you hold down Shift, it does what's called constrained proportions. That means it keeps the width and the height equal. So if I wanted to create a rectangle, I would use the rectangle tool and make it whatever size I wanted. But if I wanted a square, I would use the rectangle tool and I would hold down my Shift button. Now I want to undo what I've just done. So this is another good friend of yours, Command Z like zebra. That means undo. Command Z, and it's gone. Now I'm going to show you how to manipulate this shape because everything that you make needs to be a manipulation of shapes. And that's simply because we're making vector art, which means it's made of mathematical information versus pixels. And in order for it to be the same, bigger and smaller, it needs to be a shape. Now there's lots of ways to do that in Illustrator, but I'm showing you just the most simple. So this black selection tool lets me move objects, whereas this white selection tool lets me move and distort pieces of objects. Look, I've made a peep. All right, so I'm going to Command Z back to here. Now, if you have this selected, it'll be blue. If you don't have it selected, it will not be blue. If I hover while it's not selected, I can see that this is a path, and I can see that this is an anchor. I want to grab this anchor by using that white selection tool, holding down on that anchor, and move it up so it looks like a little bit of an egg. All right, so that is kind of easy manipulation. I'm going to go back to that circle though, because we're going to start with that for our apple. Okay, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some anchor points. I do that through holding down the pen tool and then hovering over to the anchor point tool. When I'm on the path, I can add an anchor. However, I can't add an anchor here. It'll tell me I've done something wrong. That's because anchors must live on paths. Now, these things you see here are called handlebars, and they control just the angle. So see how that angle changes? Just like I showed you before with that peep. So right here, I've added an anchor point. Right here, I'm going to add an anchor point. And the reason I'm doing that is because apples have a little divot in them. So I've pulled down that one anchor so that it has like more of a mountain look, right? Like a real apple would. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom, but I'm going to do it on a wider platform because apples will generally stand tall. You don't usually have an apple fall over, but no two apples are the same, right? So you see how I'm developing that introductory shape of an apple, and if I'm unhappy with it, I can simply like widen up that stance. Maybe it's a fatter apple, you know? So this apple though is black. That's not super realistic. What I'd like to do is change the color. There's a couple ways to change a color. This is known as my fill. This is black, this is black. This is known as my stroke. I can tell because it's only an outline of the box, whereas this is the box. If I were to try to change the inside color, but this were on top, that would mean it was active. And when I tried to change the color, all that would change is that actual outline. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see that. I'm going to zoom in a little less. See how it's red around the edges now? That's not what I meant to do. And you'll find that when your color's not working, that's usually the problem. I want it here, so I'm actually going to take this red, click and drag. See how it's like a hand pulling something? Drop it in that fill spot, and then right here, I'm going to hit the none button. I don't want an outline. That's cartoony, and we're looking for a little bit more realistic approach. So I've got a red apple. Okay, so some apples are red, but it still looks pretty flat. So what I want to do is like add some shading to indicate light, roundness, things like that. And I would do that through this gradient tool. It goes from black to white. So you're going to click the gradient tool. And with that gradient tool, you'll then click on your apple. You'll notice your apple will probably at this point go black to white. And there's a couple different options for gradients. Now, you can see here if your navigator's open, this is another way to actually move between page and page. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Whenever I'm working with a gradient tool, what I really want to do is I want to make sure that I have my gradient toolbox sections open here. And I don't see them. So to get that out, I'm going to go Window, Gradient. Now everything in this list is in alphabetical order, so it should be pretty easy to find. So now I see these gradients. There are three types of gradient. This is called a linear, this is called a round, and this one is kind of freehand, okay? Well, round or radial, sure. All right, so we've got our round one. Now this controls my color. If I double click on the black one, I can change it to say a dark red. I could now double click on the white one and I could change it to yellow. Or I could change it to orange. That's a little too subtle. So play with it some. Now I've got something that looks a little round. I will point out if you miss that button and click to the side, now you've added another color and it's going to distort things. So watch out for that. One way to get rid of it is Command Z if you've just done it. The other way is if you click on it, you'll notice a trash bin opens and you can now delete it using the trash bin. Here I can see that I can extend or make smaller the radius of that radial gradient. What I can also do here is I can move where that extends from. Now, if I were looking at an apple, in real life, I would notice that it's roundest here, but I would notice the light is probably hitting it here because I'm not looking at it with a flashlight. I'm looking at it usually with overhead light. So this is where your lightest spot should be. Should be somewhere up here. Now, quick tip. It's very easy to accidentally click and mess things up. Hit Command Z. When you're done with a tool, the best thing you can do is switch back to one of the arrow tools. Reason for that, you're going to impact other things if you don't do it that way. Okay, so I've got my apple. Now I need to make a stem. For the stem, you may use a brush tool. There's a couple different ways to make a stem. You could, do something kind of like that. You could just kind of go like that. This is going to end up looking a little nicer. Now notice there's a gradient here. That's because I've just used my gradient tool. However, I'm going to actually take that and turn it green. Oh, I'm going to turn it brown. I don't want it green. I want it brown. Orange makes a great brown. So now I've changed it to brown. I have a choice here. I could either draw again, or I could simply go over, click the one I want. Notice it changes to what that property is. Go back to my orange, find a nice brown, and now I've got that brown stem. Now, I also have a swap button. Let's say this is set to none and this is set to brown, and I really want it to be filled out. This is a swap. When I swap it, see how it fills itself in? So that's a nice, easy way to get that cool fill. Now I need a leaf. So again, I'm going to use my brush tool. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and there's lots of ways that you can make a leaf. That's the way I like to make a leaf. Some kids like to make a leaf this way. It is up to you. You are the artist, and that makes you the boss. Now I clearly don't want it with this gradient. I will now go swap this so that there's none there, and right here I'm going to choose a simple green. Now could I put a gradient on this? Absolutely. I'm not gonna. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that leaf coming right out of the stem, and notice I've chosen to put it right where my defect is. Totally okay to do that. Okay? So now I've got an apple. I want this apple to move together. I want it to be married. I don't want to have to move the stem and the leaf separately if I want to move it somewhere else. So I'm simply going to click with my mouse using my black selection tool. I'm drawing a box around it. Now I can see all three items are highlighted because they're all outlined in blue. And I'm going to hit Command G on my keyboard. That's G for group. Or I could right click and I could group. They're already grouped, so my only option is ungroup. So now when I want to move it somewhere, I have it. So now that I've finished my apple, I'm going to hold down that Alt key I told you about, and I'm going to paste it right there on this collage artboard. Now, if I have all my fruit this size, it's going to be too big. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift to constrain those proportions like we learned earlier and make it a little smaller. Now I'm ready for my pear. I'm going to click on my apple, hit Command plus a few times until the apple fills the space I would want to do more work in. I'm going to use my space bar to pull over to my blank one that says pear, and I'm going to start over with that ellipse tool. This time I'm going to go ahead and make that arc shape, that egg shape that I turned into a bit of a peep. So to do that, I'm going to start with a circle. Then I'm going to switch to that direct selection tool, click away on my artboard because remember, to find that anchor, it can't be highlighted. I'm going to pull this anchor up. I'm going to go ahead down to my add an anchor point, and I'm going to put a little tush on my pear so it can sit on a table. So I've added my anchor points just like before. I've pulled up my middle. Angles look pretty natural. So now it's for the shape of the pear. Now, pears are weird, right? There's lots of ways a pear could look. This is how I like my pear to be shaped, but you could make a pear shape in a lot of different ways. Another way that you could make a pear shape would be to go ahead and create a new ellipse, holding down Shift, pop it right on top, because sometimes they have that like bulb, right? And then if I highlight these items and I use the Pathfinder section, which is on your right, and if it's not there, simply go to Window and Pathfinder, and I'm going to choose Unite. So now I've got that weird shape that like a pear kind of has, and I can go ahead and change around these anchor points to make it look less strange, right? I'm going to personally play with this handlebar. And it's hard to see, right? So I'm going to zoom in. And zoom out. So once I'm happy with the shape, and this is still pretty weird, I'll admit, but you can keep playing with it on your own. I like this shape of pear. I'm going to continue with a shape similar to this. I feel happy about that. In my mind, pears are usually green. So what's really cool, because the last thing I drew with an ellipse became a gradient, it remembers that, right? So now all I have to do is click a dark green for the dark side and a yellow for the light side. And see how I've already got it kind of positioned in the right spot. That's where the light would hit it. Fatter down here, all of that good fun stuff. So I'm pretty much done. Here's another cool trick. Now I can go here with my white selection tool and select individual objects, or I could simply ungroup this by right-clicking, saying ungroup. I'm going to highlight these items. I'm going to utilize Alt to move them to the side, and then I'm going to group them. So you could hit Command G for group, or you could right-click group. And I'm going to go back and regroup that. Now I've got a pear. Cool, right? So I'm going to hit Command G. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to use that Alt button, and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to make my pear a little bigger than my apple because that's pretty realistic. Now I'm ready for a grape. Do not overcomplicate your grapes. Grapes are like super simple. I draw this ellipse. Now it didn't keep my gradient. So what I'm actually going to use is this eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool is going to make that whatever color you click on. So I'm going to click on the gradient and bam, I've got a green grape. I really want my grape to be purple, so I'm going to go through this process and I'm going to change it to purple. I really like it when the center's hot pink. See how it just gives it that really like plump juiciness? Now I'm going to go into that gradient tool again and change where the light hits it. I've got a grape. I'm going to take that grape and I'm going to start overlapping grapes. Whichever grape is the one you've done most recently is the one that's on top. Let's say I wanted this one on top. I could right-click, arrange, and bring to front. All right, I don't like it that way. It looks like a boysenberry or something. So I'm going to undo that. Now, I could highlight all of those by clicking on my artboard, dragging down to get the box there, and I could hold down that Alt tag one more time. And there I've got a nice group of grapes. I'm going to group these so when I move them around, they're all there. I'm going to again grab that stem and move it over. So copy, paste, do it a little different, show you another way. I'm going to ungroup. Just going to get rid of this deal. I'm going to group this. Now I know I've used this twice already. Maybe I want to use it a few more times. I could go ahead and paste a couple so I have them ready for my next couple fruit. Okay, not all fruit need that, but just so you have it. And that looks pretty grape-like to me. You're not always going to see the stems, so don't make it look like a spider web. Don't overcomplicate it. Now this looks a little empty. I might want to fill in and put another one here, but it's pretty realistic for grapes not to look perfect, so I'm going to let it go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group this. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to move it. I forgot to hold down Alt. And I'm going to make it a realistic shape. Size. That's too small. All right, I have 3 of my fruit done, and it's not been a super long amount of time. So now I'm going to zoom in. I noticed that I added an H when I was typing very quickly with that font super small. So I am going to fix that. Oh, and my last name is Hoke. So my name must be spelled wrong on all of these pages. But that's all right. I can always fix that later. I'm going to go back to that black selection tool, hold down my space bar, get to the middle of my artboard, and I see that I had planned on putting grapes here. No big deal. I'm gonna move those grapes on down. Now I'm gonna come up here. I'm actually gonna grab that apple because I know that an apple is similar to an orange. And if I pop out a couple of these anchor points, it could get very orange-like without being too super perfect. So to get the anchor delete tool, hold down that pen tool, hover to delete, let go. And get rid of this one and this one. I'm gonna go to that direct selection tool. Whoa, that didn't work out. They're so tiny, I'm missing it. See how I've got that orange shape back pretty well? But it's not perfect. Oranges aren't perfect. So that's why the apple's a great one to work with. You could also make a circle, start from scratch, whatever you want, all right? Now, oranges are orange, so I don't want this red. I'm gonna give it a nice orange color. But I forgot to select it. Excuse me. Okay, so if I go in here and I now have it selected, I can tell because it's blue. I can switch this over to the orange I liked earlier. I can switch this over to the yellow. It's a little too yellow. Not quite enough contrast for me. That's a little better. You can still see the difference. Now, I could also go in and I could freehand it over here. That might be something I want to do. Another thing I could do is put this here, click to the side to add another one, and I could turn that yellow, move that to the end, and I get like a more fine sunspot. So you don't have to have just two, but two simple. So what do you think I'm going to do now? I'm going to group it. I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to bring it down here. I forgot to use that Alt key again. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's why Command Z exists. I'm going to shift and bring it down. Oh, I meant to say Alt. My goodness. Alt and bring it down. That's it. Now, I could go ahead and I could put a line here. You're welcome to use any fruit that you like. I'm going to let you use your imagination to choose your own fruit because I don't want you to do exactly what I did. I'm going to delete these because I don't need them. So let's pretend I've got my extra fruit there. Now I need to save my work. I will go to File, Save. Do I want to save it on my computer or on my cloud? You definitely want to pick the cloud because you won't use this computer again in most cases. So if you save it on the cloud, you would do your initials, mine are EH, _ fruit. That's going to keep it nice and organized. Also, if you were turning this into me today, you would want to have your name on it so that when I download it, if you've forgotten to write your name on the piece of paper, I can tell who made it. It's just a great practice. So now I could go ahead and press save. You want to make sure you show this to me before you get out of it. All right, so I don't need you to turn this assignment into me, but I do need to see that you did some work today. So make sure you grab me at this point. So that is how you make fruit, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. You're welcome to look at other YouTube videos to see how other people would do this. This is just my process. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again. Have a great day.